iPad. Over to you, Conrad.
Right, thanks, Jasmine. A very warm welcome to everyone to today's session. It's such an interesting topic for today. It's why global education, a topic so apt in this current climate, regardless if it's COVID pandemic happening or not. It's a question for everyone. If you're an educationist, if you're a parent, if you're an employer, it's a question that I think we all want to ponder and also take some action on it. So maybe before I start asking Mr. Vikas, maybe I just introduce a bit about the entity I work with. It's at Services. We are a social enterprise, and it's Malaysia's first homegrown education service provider. We undertake education reform and transformation programs that support the system, the school leaders, teachers, parents, and community, with the aim to develop schools, public schools, which embed sustainable education practices in order to produce holistic students with 21st century competencies, right? And this is where I find it very interesting when I was looking at Mr. Vikas Pota's profile. We had a lot of alignment, and I've read one part that Mr. Vikas, where his focus and initiatives were focusing on teachers who are the agents of change. So from my perspective, I am very privileged. We are very privileged to have Mr. Vikas Pota to be with us today. Such a distinguished career. He's globally respected leader and the driving force in the education, in the international development, philanthropy.
Right. Hey, mommy's phone. I got until I got to see my name. It's right.
Interesting. And technology sectors. Maybe for those who can put your mics on mute for now, maybe. So, Mr. Vikas Pota, thank you for making time for this session, and a very warm welcome to you. Right, I have lots of questions, but maybe as we start this session, maybe we can start by just maybe sharing a bit about yourself for the benefit of our audience, and more importantly, what triggered your interest in education and what made you decide to tackle this subject?
Thank you so much for this kind invitation, Conrad and Jasmine. You know, my background actually originally wasn't in education. I should tell you that I'm not a teacher. I'm not a practitioner of any sort. I'm just someone who's interested in education, right? So many years ago, almost a decade and a half back, I got the opportunity to go work for an education entrepreneur who's based in Dubai. And on the first day of my job, he said to me, Vikas, I want to set up also my family foundation to do philanthropy. And I'd never done, I'd never run a charity or a foundation in my life. And also I'd never worked in the education sector before. And so I thought, why not? Like, it sounds pretty cool. And I should, what's not to like about this, right? This is about someone who's very successful, helping them create their legacy by way of investing their hard-earned money into education projects around the world. And so the first thing that I did was that I went and spoke to a bunch of organizations who are really highly esteemed in the education sector. So if you think about large NGOs like UNICEF, like Save the Children, like Plan, and so on and so forth. And what happened was that when you go to speak to them and you say, okay, if you're in my shoes and you wanted to be philanthropic, what would you focus on? Because the education sector is humongous, right? As a landscape. And they would all say very similar things. They would say, well, you can invest in girls' education, you can invest in WASH programs, you can invest in scholarships, you can invest in school building programs, you can invest in school feeding programs, and so the inputs were coming in quite a bit. And when I finished this round of consultations, I sat back and I actually asked, and I thought to myself in terms of what is it that I've learned from all of this and where should I focus as a result? And the thing that really struck me was that not one of these organizations spoke about teachers. And to me, that just seemed the most oddest of situations to be in, where, just if you take my personal example, I went to school, I had some great teachers, they changed my life. It's pretty simple. And so when you dig into the research on the centrality of teachers, you understand that no education system can outperform the quality of its teachers. I can put in technology, I can put in all kinds of infrastructure, I can do all of that, which is very good. I'm not saying anything against it, but the highest rate of return in turn that you have is by making sure you have the best and the brightest in the classroom teaching children. And so that's how I came to this subject about why teachers are important. And over a period of a decade, like I said, I ran a foundation that focused on teachers. So we trained teachers in sub-Saharan Africa and in Latin America. We created, as a way of looking at the status of teachers, we created an index, which was a study across many countries regarding what the status of teachers was in comparison to other professions. So in 2013, we said that only in China are teachers seen in the same regard as doctors. And then in the 2018 edition, I think Malaysia came at the top as well. And so there was a lot of progress in terms of opinion polling of general populations as to how they perceive the teaching profession. In addition to that, I created the Global Teacher Prize, which you'll be aware of. It's $1 million prize for a teacher. My founder and my employer at that time, came up with this idea, a very simplistic idea, that how do we get teachers and great teaching spoken about at dinner table conversations in families, because in North London where I live, every night we bring, when we have dinner with our children, we will often talk about, what did you do in school today? And more often than not, it turns into a negative conversation. And so our effort was, how do I turn it into a positive conversation, saying, hey, did you hear about this math teacher? Or hey, did you hear about a teacher in America or in Malaysia or wherever it is, who does this most incredible thing? And over a period of 7 years, what we saw was humongous traction in terms of just acknowledgement that teachers were important as a result of it, right? And so, and that's taken me to where I am today, where last year, because of the pandemic, we're all sitting at home to some degree, and I just felt that there was something quite important to do in terms of to bring teachers together to say, okay, we're all in this together. COVID has brought everyone to its knees around the world, especially in the education sector. And I think, what's required is for us to have a global conversation and actually show solidarity with each other, saying that, okay, this is what we as teachers should be thinking about as the transition of our profession going forward. So I'll stop there, but please ask any questions.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that part, how you alluded to the term global education. Now, for some people, that term sounds very bombastic, especially when it looked from the lens of a primary and a secondary school and trying to grow up with this term called global education. So from your perspective, Mr. Vikas, right, what is your interpretation, expectation of global education? And more importantly, how can we expand it and advance it across the globe?
Yeah, I mean, so global education, also, I ask myself that question every day, actually, Conrad, in terms of what does it actually mean? Given that much of what we do is embedded in national education systems that obviously national authorities, have a huge influence over in terms of curriculum and what we learn and so on and so forth. I actually think global education as a concept is rooted in this idea of empathy and coexistence and understanding. And so I do think that there's something quite wonderful about that. And when I think about raising my children, I often think, well, I want them to know what other people feel and think around the world. I want them to be able to empathize that just because it happens in Malaysia doesn't mean that it's not my problem in London. Or just because there's a success in Malaysia doesn't mean it's not my success in London. And so it's that empathy that we're trying to create mindsets of the future generation that think like that. I think that's powerful. That said and done, when I talk about global education, I don't necessarily mean that, but that I give you as a definition. I actually think that we have far more in common as educators, as a profession, as a sector, than divides us. And so that's what I'm interested in, keen in understanding, in terms of what is the applicability of your experience in Malaysia to my school in London, or my school in Jakarta, or my school in San Francisco, and that's, I think, the more interesting thing, because I think educators in schools grapple with similar things. It's not as if you have to reinvent the wheel, as it were, but I think there are so many transferable lessons as to what makes a good school, how you invest in teachers, how you raise the standard of education for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to flip that question a bit, Mr. Vikas. from the perspective of an employer. Now, when we started this program, School Transformation Program 10 years ago, it was with the intent to create quality and holistic students who will enter universities and at the end of the day become good candidates for employment, right? And it's trying to meet a supply that meets the demand of the employers. Now, as a CEO of Waraki Foundation, you're the Group Chief Executive of Tomorrow Digital. You are an employer, right? And what do you look for in a candidate which can be attributed to the interventions at the primary and secondary school way back there? All right. And my next question would then be, what should the focus be in the primary and secondary schools now to mold the students for the future, so that as an employer, when you look at it, yes, I want these people?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I answer it in two ways. One is around, I've engaged a lot with the World Economic Forum, which organizes this humongous conferences, the most famous being in Davos, and which they've had to transfer, by the way, to Singapore for later on this year because of the pandemic. But, they've through that body, we've done a lot of work in terms of what are the skill sets that employers look for, what should educators be doing? But more importantly, it's taking the input of employers, right? And trying to understand actually what is it that the workplace of tomorrow will be demanding. Now, what's happened interestingly over the last year or so is that the pandemic has come and disrupted almost everything, including the world of work, right? So you look at some industries, and frankly, they're not going to exist. Right. And so that's the issue that we have, is that we're in this humongous time of flux. And so what is it that you advise people? Now, if you stand back and you say to me, regardless of COVID and the pandemic, I give you an example. In 2018, I held a conference that was to do with how do you prepare young people for the future of 2030 and beyond. Now, 2030 is important for a number of reasons. Number one is the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has set expire in 2030, right? And they aspire for everyone to have a better standard of education. But, until 2018, it was all very abstract. Whereas in 2018, it became real because a child that enters in 2018 kindergarten will graduate in 2030 after 12 years of education from school. So it's a very real thing, right? So this child that enters today in 2030, what will they leave with? And educators or system leaders or captains of industry could not answer that question. And that's what I found the most frightening. And so that is something that we should think about in terms of, well, the transition of society and the workplace and the world of work is happening at such a pace and has been further disrupted. Well, what would children in the future find useful? So I, as an employer, for example, do I say, I before I even tell you that, let me just share with you. There used to be a time when I still do a lot of mentoring and coaching and speaking to young children and giving them careers advice. And so there was a time my Indian heritage in me would say, there's a kick in, like, that happens where, if someone says, what should I do when I graduate? I'd say, look, if you don't know what to do, there are 2 or 3 professions that are here to stay. First being medicine, the second being lawyers, the third being accountants. These things will never, ever go away. But the reality is that I've stopped saying that, because I think these same professions are going to lose so many jobs because of automation and increased sophistication and introduction of technology that I can't really hand on heart say become a lawyer, because AI bots will do most of the drafting of legal content. If I look at medicine, firstly, they have workplace issues and rights and pay and all those kinds of things, which are a problem. But secondly, in the NHS, for example, we have a free to use public health system. There's no reason why they can't go to doctors in India or in the Philippines. You give me diagnosis using Skype or Zoom or whatever it is. Now, because of COVID, that's now acceptable, right? And so when we pay £100,000 for a salary for a doctor, whereas in another part of the world it's that much cheaper and they receive the same training, you've got to think in terms of that kind of context, right? Or you look at accountancy, software packages that do most of the work an accountant used to do. Why do you need accountants? And so, there's so much flux, again, I'm trying to say to you. So when you stand back, I don't think it's useful to give children advice about professions anymore. right? But I do tell them that there are a few things that I think that are quite powerful. And so, for example, this love of learning, that will never go out of fashion, right? So when you think about the transition that's happening, that you will live longer, firstly, in the future, right? No longer is your work span 40 years, it could be 60, 80 years perhaps, right? Because we will live longer. Well, in that span, just because you graduate from university at the age of 21, does that mean you don't learn again, right? So you will entirely have to have this mindset that I will have to learn, relearn at least 5, 6, 7 times in my career. And so there's that love of learning, and how you learn, I think, is quite important. The second thing is, the second thing that's never going to go out of fashion is just an incredible positive attitude to life. When I look at employing people, I value that, right? I'd rather have someone who has a can-do attitude than a can't-do attitude. And so that, I think, is incredibly important when it comes to the workplace, and when it comes to future skills. So when you think about as educators, you think about the next generation, I would say to you, these softer things are often the things that make the biggest difference and will be there for longer to stay.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Vikas. Maybe Dr. Mindy, you would like to add some questions?
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everyone. So I'm Mindy. Let me just give a little bit of background. I'm with the Ministry of Education Malaysia. Specifically, I'm attached to the English Language Training Center, Ministry of Education Malaysia, and this is a center that trains in-service teachers. So, Vikas, I think first and foremost, it's an honor to be on the same platform with you this evening. And I heard with great interest your passion and your interest in teachers. And I think here at ELTC, that is the short for English Language Training Center. So here at ELTC, we are very passionate about teachers as well. In fact, all our functions, our vision, and our mission is to ensure that teachers in Malaysia are of exceptionally good quality, and they are competent in what they do, and they are able to deliver in the classroom and impact students in terms of learning. And I do completely agree with what you just mentioned, Mr. Vikas, that the quality of any education, and I wrote that down very quickly just now, because it is one of the key factors that is already in the Malaysia education blueprint itself, which says that the quality of any education system completely rests on the quality of the teachers. And here, the Ministry of Education Malaysia has done much to ensure that we have teachers who are of good quality, and specifically focusing on English language teachers, because here at ELTC, we focus on providing continuous professional development courses for teachers. Yeah, and I've also read with much interest your perspectives on global learning and global education, basically looking at how we understand the links between people. So in this case, teachers, how do we connect teachers from across the world? How do we build positivity? How do we build trust? How do we sustain future education without compromising on quality? How do we bring in the elements of values, empathy? Yeah, how do we resolve conflicts, teacher-to-teacher conflicts, not only within the Malaysian context, because I believe that what is being faced by teachers in Malaysia, basically due to the pandemic that has been around lately, is also something that teachers are experiencing across the globe as well. And I think one of the issues that our teachers are facing now is how to continue teaching, given that face-to-face sessions are no longer in place. It is very difficult to bring students or to get together in the classroom setup. So the classroom basically becomes your screen. You're the teacher on this side, the students on that side. So I suppose one of the things that I would like to ask, or maybe you can share, Mr. Vikas, is that how do we get teachers to understand that first and foremost, it's no longer the classroom, so you're not face to face, and to get teachers to understand that they need to do certain interventions and certain steps because students on the other side are simply not connecting to them, and that is impeding the teaching and learning process. So maybe there's something here that you can share for teachers, not just in Malaysia. I think it's across. So I think it's a question that I'm very interested in wanting to know as well, because here we impact on teachers in terms of training them. So maybe there's something you can share here.
Thank you, Dr. Mindy. Thank you so much for your kind words. And I have worked previously with your Ministry of Education, and
Okay.
I hold all of you in a high regard. The thing you say to me, which astounds me, and I'm sure won't come as a surprise to the audience over here, is really to do with teacher voice, actually. And what I found is that whilst as administrators, as leaders, as decision makers, we obviously have a lot of intelligence, a lot of intellect, a lot of passion for the subject, but there is no substitute for teacher experience and it speaking, and showing and telling teachers what's happening. So, you take the pandemic, and some of the best professional development that I've seen has actually come from the teacher community, right? And so now every school has been jolted into thinking about hybrid reality or online learning. And that training has happened at the school level, right? By teachers, by colleagues. And I think that learned or lived experience is what's I think really important from this. It's easy to say Microsoft or Leaped, sorry, Conrad, forgive me for saying that, or whoever it is, as experts come and speak, but actually far more powerful and far more resonant. And we know that teachers, there's a fundamental rule that I apply to everything, which is the thing that I've got to learn is that teachers trust teachers and schools trust schools. They don't care about anyone else. And so, given that in mind, let's work with teachers to make sure that those that are exemplars to actually show and tell how they use technologies, incorporate it into their teaching and those kinds of things. So, to give you an example, and Jasmane knows this and Conrad knows this, is that on 17th of April, again, exactly dealing with the same situation that you're talking about, you're right to say that the whole world is facing the same challenge, which is how do we uplift the capacity of the teaching profession to actually teach online and use hybrid reality. So I am hosting my organization T4 is hosting something called the Teacher Tech Summit, and the idea there is exactly what I mentioned to you, which is I'm trying to find teachers who really excel in the use of technology. I don't mean in terms of these are shiny products, but how they embed them and actually use them. And we're having 10-minute segments across 5 different areas and 3 teachers per segment, saying, okay, you have 10 minutes to show teachers how you do these things. And I think that's much powerful than you and I sitting here and saying, hey, this is Microsoft Teams and this is how you do it. And this is how you engage children in online classrooms. So let me give you some examples of subjects we're covering, right? So the first thing is we're saying, how do you design the learning experience for hybrid environments? The second is around how do you create community in online classrooms? The third is around how do I create good digital content? The fourth is how do we assess learning in online environments? And the fifth is how do we ensure equity and inclusion in online learning? And so I'm going to put up this link for the Teacher Tech Summit in terms of just description on this chat over here. And so you can see for yourself the subjects being covered. And if you go to the homepage, which is just T4 Education, you can register for this event. And I hope that the ministry in Malaysia, LEPED, and everyone will support this initiative. It's a free global conference, professional development for teachers, and we're having captioned subtitles so that many more can join in. I also should say, Conrad, that I want to congratulate Jasmane because yesterday she got announced as a country ambassador for us for T4. So thank you so much, Jasmane, for coming forward. I really appreciate it. I know you're embarrassed, but don't be. We're immensely proud and thankful to you for this. And so, in a roundabout way, Dr. Mindy, I hope that answers your question. But
Okay.
suffice to say, teachers in Malaysia are not on their own in this. For many years, I have, and again, and it's a bone of contention. I receive so many presentations about the future of education. Every day of the week, I used to get someone sending me some sort of presentation. And so I often used to remark that actually what's going to happen is that, education as it's certainly the structural side of it has remained in place since the first industrial revolution. And now we're in the fourth. Not much has changed, right? And so no matter how much we've tried, actually what I have always thought, and which is proving to be correct, which is I think it'll be a reaction to what happens in society that will change schooling. And that is what we're seeing today. The pandemic has come and we're having to adopt. This is not about some minister or some head of government saying we're going to change education, but we've had to change. And as part of that change, teachers have now come to realize that actually there is no alternative but in the use of technology. And so we might as well upskill ourselves, might as well, learn how to do these things.
Okay, there are many teachers who actually try. They try very hard, but we also see that teachers easily give up because not every teacher has the ability or the skill to be able to adapt to these online technology. The teachers range from those who are as young as 20s, 20, early 20s, 30s, 40s, and then there are teachers in the senior group, 50 and above. So what we see, one of the issues, and I think it's also across everywhere, is that sometimes teachers, they're just not motivated because they just don't know how to use technology. They want to, but they do not know. They try and then they fail halfway through. And despite all the applications made available to them, somehow the teachers are not able to move. So for teachers like this, who may be part of our audience today, what advice or how would you ask them to move on? Because teachers have to move, lessons have to go on. And, teachers facing these challenges tend to stop halfway. So, what can we say to these teachers?
Yeah, so again, I want to broaden this out to more than just about technology because I think that's unfair pressure on teachers actually. Of course, everyone realizes use of tech is important, but actually, if you stand back a little bit, and so in May last year, again, we hosted the first T4 conference, which became the largest education event in the world with over 100,000 teachers from around the world participating, including many from Malaysia. What we tried to do was understand what the transition of the profession was going to be as a result of the pandemic. Everyone was asking, what does the new normal look for us, right? And so at the end of this mega event that we organized, there was a manifesto that was decided upon, right? And so let me just tell those on the Zoom call today in terms of what we surmised at that point, and let's just reflect as to whether it stands today because it's been 8 months and a lot has happened, right? So what we said was that um, you know there are some takeaways for teachers by teachers, right, on how to navigate this new normal. The first is teachers in the future will have to get better at involving the local community and learn how to form partnerships and collaborate more effectively. So the experience that we are currently going through, shows that we need to learn how to do more with those outside of our classrooms, and this includes the local community. The pandemic clearly shows that we have to build relationships and partnerships with local communities and services, and collaborate with those who we don't do so already with, which includes the NGO sector, the private sector, universities, technology businesses. All of these are willing to join hands. The second thing that we surmised in terms of a takeaway was teachers should get involved with teacher organizations. And I say organizations in a very loose way, but what I mean is groups of teachers. So we have an opportunity as teachers, I believe, to influence decision making, negotiate what works best for you, and advocate for things that matter when teachers come together and speak collectively. Look for such opportunities in local or national organizations and the unions in your countries. Passionate and professional practitioners taking the lead is what is required, especially in these uncertain times. The third thing was around taking charge of your own development. If there is one thing we have learned through the pandemic is that, time needs to be put aside for professional development. We need to use the strength of teacher networks and professional communities to design and own the professional development, which should include teaching practice and technology. So learn to design the learning experience and learn, and every teacher should untap the potential of technology is what we said. And the last point was, the last takeaway was, look after yourself. It really matters. The well-being of students, parents, and our communities is directly related to teacher well-being. We need to teach the values of educating the whole child, which includes physical education, mental health, social, emotional, the fine arts, the music being treated as equal as literacy and numeracy. And so when you think about these takeaways, Dr. Mindy, they're wider than just about technology, but they talk about the centrality of teachers. In fact, if someone said to me, what is the silver lining that's come from the pandemic? Of course, there's this whole technological revolution that's happening. But actually, I think the silver lining is that we finally have a conversation on teacher well-being and teacher mental health and teacher stress and teacher workload. And I think that is the silver lining that actually this pandemic now shows us, where we can actually have a conversation and engage policymakers as to, well, what is it that we're going to do? How is it we're going to invest in these things equally as much as the investment that is required in technology, as an example? I'll stop there, but please ask any questions.
So yeah, so that's good. So the way I understand is that at this point in time, professional learning communities, peer-led learning among teachers, peer-led culture of sharing and strengthening teachers would be the way to go. Yeah, Mr. Vikas,
Yes.
that would be how it should go. And for institutions like us, where we conduct teacher training, what would you say would be a practical or a beneficial approach for us to take? Traditionally, we have been conducting short courses, we have longer courses, and now we are shifting all our courses towards online training, fully online training, which we find is not really giving us the kind of impact that we normally got when we were doing face-to-face training. We are also not able to go to the schools, so we are trying to support teachers online. And I think this is also something that everyone everywhere is facing if they are a training institution for teachers. So in that regard, what would be some of these strategies or relevant ways for us to make our job more relevant to teachers? So perhaps.
Yeah, it's a great question, Dr. Mindy. And actually, the same disruption that we're seeing in schools is going to happen to your sector as well, which is teacher training. And so you just need to be aware that your entire service is going to face disruption. In that, there are so many, for example, providers now providing teacher training as an example, right? And so whilst, yes, of course, ministries of education have this responsibility and interest, because tax money goes into servicing your public education system, we all need to become better at embracing technology, including teacher training institutions. And so when you think about the modality, the tools, the techniques required to make sure delivery of training is successful, institutions like yours will also have to make that pivot and that shift, right? And so yes, of course, we hanker for in-person training. Of course, there's nothing like it. But the reality is that governments now will get seduced in terms of the low cost required for doing these things because of technology. And as a result, we will all be forced down this path. So the writing is on the wall. We all need to become better at using these technologies.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that we are doing here is that we are constantly exposing teachers to all sorts of technological tools in the hope that and trying to make them simple enough for teachers to use as they deliver their lessons. Yeah. So thank you very much, Mr. Vikas.
Thank
I
you,
think
Dr.
some of the questions that I wanted to know, the answers to you have shared, and we'll try to put those in practice. Thank you. Over to you, Jasmine.
Thank you so much.
Maybe Jasmine,
Yes,
before we go, if we still have time, maybe I can throw one question to Mr. Vikas again.
sure,
I mean,
Conrad. I will
right.
allow you to do that.
All right, Mr. Vikas, you have the opportunity to see many companies in the education space. You know, you've seen proposals and seen many ideas being thrown and innovation. Now, I just want to know from your perspective, what are the what kind of companies, who are these entities which are making greatest advancements in the education space, and what are they focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, so look, it's a great question. And if you ask me who are the winners from the pandemic, I would say to not necessarily education technology business or ed tech, they're the communications platforms businesses. Like we're conducting this on Zoom. You know, we've seen its stock price just shoot up, right? Many thousand% as a result of it. Or you take Microsoft Teams, or you take Google Classroom. These are all communications technologies. They don't give you anything more than that. They connect you to things, right? And
Yeah.
so more and more features are added to them. So if we put them to the side, you know, you look at ed tech, as it were, right? And so these are to do with, you know, ed tech largely does three things. One is that it provides efficiency to school systems, right? It's the school administration system. So whether you can call them also teacher productivity or school administration kind of things. So for example, you know, payroll systems, VLEs. If you look at, you know, lesson planning apps, lesson sharing apps, all that kind of thing, which I bucket in the productivity bucket, right? The second is to do with spanning distance, so distance learning, right? And so there are plenty of providers that kind of do that, and that's one of the functions of EdTech and where it comes into its own. But the real juice, as I call it, right, is in the third bucket, which is to do with personalized learning. And so that personalized learning approach is where the strength of technology lies. You know, I don't know how many kids are in a classroom in Malaysia, but just imagine, like, you know, where you have large classrooms, you know, teaching to that child and actually tracking them on a very personal basis and serving them up opportunities to learn, because we know how they've performed so far, I think are very powerful. And that's what I think the future of education technology is and where it's going to. And so I would say to you, keep an eye on technologies that deal with that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vikas. Over to you, Jasmine.
All right. Thank you so much. What interesting points that have been raised today. I'm going to open the floor to the audience. Is there anyone who's bold enough to ask a question? Okay, I've seen a hand already. Can you? Okay, Nina. Can
Hi,
someone
thanks a lot.
highlight Nina, please?
Hi, Vikas. Nina here, also from LEAPED. My question, first of all, thank you so much. You said so many fascinating things. My head is swimming right now, but I just wanted to go back to your point on silver lining. And you said, you know, how there are many silver linings. So possibly, I put it in the chat, is one possible silver lining is that we need to move away from a teacher-centric, because, you know, COVID has exposed how dependent we are on that face-to-face, very teacher-centric approach, and that we need to now more than ever make good on that vision of a student-centered learning where they take more ownership for their own learning. And that's really the challenge for teachers, not to get so obsessed with online learning, because that's just one tool, but how do you get that learning? How do you get students to engage with their own learning? Thanks.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. Everything we do is about the learner, and that's a fact. What I will say to you is that, you know, robots are not going to replace teachers, right? We know that. Maybe some parts of the job, yes, because those are more efficiently done elsewhere. But certainly, the role of a teacher is there in terms of is central to everything. And so I agree with you. I think a silver lining is that realization that actually this is about learners, and actually the conversation that I see going on around the world around inequity in particular has been fascinating, because, you know, we've tolerated for far too long failing education systems by any standard or any means. Like, you know, if you look at, I remember I did this study about 5 years ago, there are almost like 500 million children in failing schools around the world. And these are failing by the standards and the regulators in these countries, right? And so you just think, why do we tolerate that? I mean, firstly, just look at the economics of that. Like, tax money goes into public education, and we're okay with 500 million children failing. And so what I think has happened is the pandemic, because of the homeschooling that has happened, parents are far more interested and engaged in education now, and actually than they ever have been.
Yeah.
That also is a silver lining that's come from it, and couldn't have come much sooner. Nina, I see in your surname you have a very iconic name, Disney. Do you have something to do with the Disney company? Are you a member of the family?
Well, my husband is British and he has a very tangential link to the Walt Disney, but not close enough to have any shares in the Disney Corporation or even to get free tickets to Disneyland, unfortunately.
It's all a bit Mickey Mouse to me, if you ask me. But listen, I'd love to keep connected with everyone here. So
yes, I would too.
What I'd like to do is tell you that I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you go and send me a LinkedIn connection request, and I'm happy to do that. And please, can I please implore everyone to register for the Teacher Tech Summit, because this absolutely speaks to the subject that Dr. Mindy speaks about and what Conrad has presented. We'd love to see you at.
Right.
So yes, I think we're almost at the end of the session. I just want to touch on one point in the chat. Someone's saying, highlighting a very real challenge, the language barrier that impacts motivation in students. And I'm bringing it back to a Malaysian context here. Yes, because a global platform is always in English, right?
Yeah.
How do you, have you come across that, Vikas?
Yeah, it's a real problem, actually. So what happens is that with these events that we organize, what we try to do, let me give you an example. The first event that we did last year, we were just going to do in English because it's just so difficult. Like, technology doesn't exist for us to do this at an economic way. And so I actually had a couple of phone calls from ministers of education, one in the Middle East and one in Latin America, saying, hey, you've got to do this in Arabic and in Spanish. And so we found some sort of we hacked away, but it was really costly, let me just tell you, to do. And luckily I raised some money in terms of sponsorship to be able to have those two languages, right? Then in World Education Week, which was 100 schools presenting, and we had some schools from Malaysia, by the way, presenting during World Education Week, which 40,000 people attended. We then decided to use Microsoft Teams Live as our platform. And the reason was that their AI tools actually allow for, when I'm speaking in English, you can actually get subtitle captions in 6 other languages, right? And so that is what we did for them. And for the Teacher Tech Summit, we're trying another approach, which is using an app that you can choose a number of languages to get caption translations in. And so the future is caption translations as opposed to live translation, because live translation is just way too expensive.
All right. Thanks for that. The last in closure, I think we want to say thank you to you for taking the time, waking up so early for LIPED, and all our Malaysian colleagues and people from across the world. I see Alejandra. I don't know where she's from. I looked at her registration. Welcome to Malaysia virtually. Welcome here. It's nice to have you. I know we have a few South Africans online. So it's just wonderful to be collaborating in this way, sharing ideas, discussing points that we are thinking about, and actually having a chance to speak to people who are experienced and have actually done this to give us more motivation and inspire us to do more. So LIPED will be launching global programs, and we will share that with you, Mr. Vikas. And officially, we are partners now with T4. Thank you.
Jasmane, thank you so much for this opportunity. And this is exactly what I think the power of technology is that we democratize access to information and knowledge. The fact that Alejandra from Argentina is able to participate, and someone from South Africa is meant to participate, I think that actually demonstrates the power of technology and why we should embrace it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will follow up after this session with all the participants to send you a link to complete a feedback form and also request a certificate if you want one. Right? So that will come in an email. Did you want to say something, Vikas?
I have a question for Dr. Mindy.
Yes.
Okay.
I am an opportunist by every account. And so I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to take this opportunity saying, look, Dr. Mindy, you represent the Ministry of Education in Malaysia. How do we get every single teacher in Malaysia to participate in the Teacher Tech Summit? And so I'll give you an example. There are ministries around the world that do exactly that. And so in the Philippines, the Secretary of Education actually has sent out to every single teacher in the Philippines that this event is happening, and she Facebooks it and everything else. And we get thousands. In Nigeria, an SMS is sent to every single teacher in Nigeria to participate. Is it possible in Malaysia?
Yeah, in fact, Mr. Vikas, it is possible here in Malaysia because we have communication networks that go down to from the center, that means the Ministry of Education, to the state departments, and via social channels to the district departments and on to the teachers. So normally when we have something that we want to communicate to them, we use these social networks and these channels. So it's possible for us to send down any kind of information on a bigger and grander scale. Yeah. So if there are opportunities for our teachers to go on board on seminars, on webinars, or summits, that are global in nature, I think we will not have a problem communicating this to the teachers, because we want our teachers to look towards a broader perspective, to think global, to have a mindset that's global in nature, so that they can learn and share from one another. So yeah, if there are any sort of opportunities for the teachers here, I will be very grateful, and I will really appreciate that we are able to provide this opportunity to our teachers. Yeah.
So I look at my fellow colleague Jasmane, who is a country ambassador now. Jasmane, you heard this from Dr. Mindy. Over to you.
Mr. Vikas, I can add something, Mr. Vikas, that we don't have the reach of 10,000 schools as Dr. Mindy has, but we do have reached out to about 160 plus schools with our people and team members involved in it. What we can do is, we'll definitely, I think this is so valuable to share this kind of forums and platforms and seminars. So we'll definitely extend this invitation of this event to the schools.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Vikas,
perhaps here we can also organize one for, we have roughly about 48,000 teachers on board for English language teaching and learning, and I think we can easily engage them on a global based seminar. It would be wonderful for you to speak directly to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, please, Jasmine can send you materials, and I look forward to any partnership that we can have.
Mr. Vikas, don't worry, Jasmine will do just that. Our trust school people are here, and they're listening, and they are very good, and they will be joining that Tech Summit. I can almost mention names already, but I won't. So we will work on that, and we'll get back to you and register and stuff like that. I'm very excited about what's happening in Malaysia with education and especially global learning. And just before I forget, we also have a global ambassador for British Council and eTwinnings online who came to attend the session. But we will move from this point forward, and yes, we will be collaborating across countries, across the world. Thank you, everyone. I've just posted the link to the feedback form in the chat. If you didn't copy it, it's okay. You will receive an email from me. Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.